Hi weaving friends, welcome to this year's free project, which is going to be a rigid Heddle pillow cover or cushion cover. And I'm really excited about this project. You can find the free printable pattern on my website, and that link will be underneath this video. This video is broken into sections because it did become very long as I was making it. And I'm really excited to tell you that this is a collaboration with Low Yarn Wheels and Looms. So a huge thank you to Low Yarn for sponsoring this video. I'm going to be using the Flex Rigid Heddle 50 centimeter loom. And this project utilizes the Very Dent Heddles, and I have them in different arrangements and using all different thicknesses of yarns. All of the details for this project will either be in the video or in the pattern or both. So make sure that you head over to my website and download your free printable pattern. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to start by having a look with you at some of the yarns that I've chosen, and this is very relevant to what we're doing because we need to choose the Heddle sizes and the Heddle segment sizes to best fit the different types of yarns that I'm using here. So these yarns that I've got set over to the side, they are all a fingering weight wool, and I've used fingering weight wool very, very much in my weaving journey. And so I know that the set that I wanted for those was 10 ends per inch. So that is the 10 ends per inch Heddle size. That's one segment. And I'm going to put those segments together to make the sections. And you'll see me do that afterwards when I get to the section where we actually put all of these pieces into the Heddle to make up what we're going to do. But it's these two yarns in particular that I wanted to talk about because these are my sort of special novelty yarns that I'm going to be using for this project. And these are the yarns that are going to bring a bit of pizzazz to the project, I suppose. So these are both sari silk yarns, but made in slightly different ways. So this first one is recycled silk sari ribbon, and it is as you can see, a conglomeration of all different sari silks, all twisted and plied into yarns with a great range of colors. So the first thing I need to do is choose what size Heddle I'm going to be using for this particular yarn. And I can do that just by first removing the label, but then also I'm going to just grab like a little bit of the yarn, if I can untwist it without making a big mess of things. So there's an end of some of the yarn there. By the way, this is kind of thick and thin. It's not consistent throughout. So I'm going to take the yarn at its thickest point to choose the Heddle size that I want for that, because I want to make sure that it's comfortable in that Heddle size at its most thickest. So I knew for just looking at this yarn that it was going to be a toss-up between the 2.5 and the 5 dent Heddle segments. So first of all, we will try the 5 dent, which is this one right here. And I'm just going to grab that end that I had and pull it through one of the holes and see how that goes. Okay, so it's all right in that hole, but it is a little bit squishy. And so with the Heddle going back and forth, up and down, I feel like I'd probably want a little more space for this particular yarn. So I'm going to try the 2.5 dent. Now the 2.5 comes in these single segments because they're pretty big. Let's compare it to the 10 dent. You can see what I mean, pretty big segment. And the segments are like the same segment size at the ends. So that's why in this particular size or width of Heddle segment, there's just one hole. All right, so let's try the yarn in this one and see what I think of that. Okay, so there's still quite a bit of room in that Heddle hole. Like I could go much chunkier with this 2.5, but I'm pretty keen to use it. And I like the idea of there not being too much friction, because when I look at this yarn, it is very hairy, lots of flyaway ends and a fraying kind of aspect to it. And so I don't want to overly stress that yarn. So I am going to go with the 2.5 dent for this yarn. Okay, so that's all good. Now we look at the actual ribbon itself. Even though the ribbon is quite wide compared to this other sari silk yarn, this yarn has been twisted, and so it has a more compact look and feel to it. But this one is actual ribbon lengths that have been basically tied together. So I can afford to have a little bit more, I can afford to set this a little bit closer together, knowing that it's going to be kind of squashed. So, you know, even though it's this thick, when I'm holding it out, that's going to be under tension. So it's going to be more like that. So that's an end there that I'm just going to test. And I'm thinking that the 5 dent will be just right for this. So I'll give that a shot. It's not that easy to get through, but there is still space in the hole and it runs through there just fine. And then if I pop it into the slot to compare, that's going to be very happy in that slot. So I think that that is what I'll do. 5 dent for the actual ribbon and 2.5 for this yarn, and we'll see how we go. So my next task is to take these 2 skeins to my yarn swift and to get them into bowls so that I can easily use them for warping and weaving, get them into a usable format. If I try to feed off yarn with them just like this, then I'm asking for trouble. I'm going to get tangles and all sorts of things. So that's the next job to do. Let's have a look now at how we're going to be setting up the heddle for this project, because what is integral to this project is the different sizes that I have already determined to use, as I mentioned before. And I showed you some of the segments, but these other segments that I will be using, so the 10 dent, the 2.5 and the 5, and that's how the different ones look. And so basically, because you can take these in and out of the actual heddle frame, you can configure them however you want to do. And that's exactly what I'm doing for this project. I just had a look at my yarns, had a look at my colors, had to think about the design that was in my mind for the pillow cover, and I went from there. So I figured out how many of each segment I want to go in each space. And now it's just a matter of putting them in. So I've got the bracket and the rings on one end of the heddle frames, and I'm going to start at the other end, and I'm going to slide the pieces in to the grooves. Sometimes it might just be easier when you're actually starting to start up the end where you want to put in the first piece. Okay, so I'm putting in my 10 dent pieces first. And I'm going to actually put in 5 of those. That's 3. You notice that I'm just keeping a hand on the rest of the frame so that it doesn't spring apart and then the pieces will fall out. So just as I go, I'm sliding them on in to the grooves. Okay, so once I get 5, let me check. Was that 5 or 4? That was only 4. I can count. I promise I can count. Last one. And these are going to form a kind of a border of just the fingering weight yarns at the edges. All right, and then the next one that I'm going to pop in there is going to be a 2.5. So I'm going to do the same thing into the grooves and along we go. Then I'm going to pop in one of the 5 dent sections. And then follow that up with another 2.5. All of these Heddle sections have a little bit of print on one of the tops. I usually like to put them at the top of the frame. It doesn't matter if you put them either way, they're just the same. But just for the sake of that continuity, I like to put that at the top. And it does have a sort of a front and back. Like if you look at the back of this, it's got like little imprinted circles on it. It's got a little beveled part in one of the top edges. So I know that that's the back part. Again, if you warped with them like that, with the back part showing, you're still going to be able to weave just fine. But I like to have them all the same. All right, so that's my first section of changing it up. And now I'm going to go back to the 10 dent heddles, but not for 5 this time, just for 3. You'll find all of this information in the pattern notes, so you will know exactly what sections you need for yourself. And you also have the flexibility to really change this up and make it your own if you want to. Perhaps you only have, 2 sizes of Heddle sections. That's fine. Make it work with what you have and the types of yarns that you have if they fit in those sections and everything. Or you could absolutely go ahead and get the Heddle sections that I have used. That will all be detailed in the pattern too, exactly how many Heddle sections of each size you would need and all of that, all the yarns, everything. So that's going to be linked in the description box below. And it's a free pattern. All right, so I put in 3 sections of the 10 dent. So now I've put in my next 2.5 dent, and then I'm moving to my 5 dent section. So you can see that I'm repeating what I did here. And then another 2.5. Okay, and while you're putting them in, you just want to make sure that they're lining up straight, because if you have them in kind of crooked like that, they're not going to probably stay put. You're going to have issues with it moving out of place. But if it's up against the last piece that you put in and it's nice and straight, you won't have any issues. So now I'm going to revert back to my 10 dents once again, and I'm going to put 3 sections of those in again. This is such an adaptable project, and you'll see more of that once we actually start warping, and you can see how I'm going to use the yarns, because I've got a little secret to share. I haven't exactly planned out my yarn placement yet, my colours and everything. Like I've got my colour pool to draw from, but I'm going to let the yarns kind of speak to me once I get to the loom and decide what to do. So this is a really interesting project for me, going back to my 2.5 again, because I usually plan things fairly meticulously, and I often get stuck with kind of the same colours. I've got my favourite colours and they're kind of like a safety zone, and I stick to those colours a lot. And for this project, I particularly wanted to give myself some license to really branch out, change things up with colour, with yarns, with these different sizes of Heddle pieces, with everything. So it's going to be quite different to what you've seen from me before, and I think that'll be a good thing. And I think we all need to do that sometimes. It's good for us to change things up. All right, so now I'm putting in my last section of 10 dent Heddles, and because I'm coming to the end, I'm going to put in 5 like I did at the start, so then I've got that balance. All right, so I said it's going to be a different project for me and a little bit wacky, but not that wacky, because you know we are doing things like balancing. So 1, 2, 3. I still want it to be aesthetically pleasing, and I think it will be. I think it's going to be really beautiful. All right, last one. Now I want to secure all of these Heddles that I've just put into place. So I'm going to hold on to that. If those bars start to come apart, then the Heddle places will come out, and I'm going to put my little keeper in place, which goes, it's got the little bit sticking up in the middle, and that goes into a groove, and then you also put it into a groove on the bottom. It's a little tricky to do one-handed, but just be patient and make it happen. So do you notice something at this end? Let's have a look at the other end. I've got a lot more space here than I do here at this end. So that means I need to do a little bit of shuffling and just push that bracket along a little bit at this end. Okay. And then I want to just carefully move all of these sections along, because I don't want to have a heap of the bar left exposed at one end and then hardly any bar at all on the other end, because I do have to grab onto this Heddle. I do have to put it in the Heddle supports. So I need the space to be able to do that effectively. All right, so this end, push that along. How am I doing? Almost there. I reckon I can probably push just a little bit further, but not very far at all at this end. So I'll just move my little rubber parts, because they'll stop you being able to move the green bracket, and then gently push along. And then push up this bracket as well. That's better. Now I've got 2 little rubber rings for this end as well. So I'll pop them on just over the ends, and they really help to hold that all in place so that your green brackets don't work their way out of place, and then of course that will destabilize the rest of it. So I'll move these other rings back in place as well on this end. And almost looks like a piece of art. It's so lovely. It's all ready to use. So let's get to the warping. Let's have a quick look at my setup. I've got the loom at one end of the table, and it does have the little rubber stoppers right down here that you can just sit over the edge of the table, so you don't actually need to clamp this loom to the table, which is super handy. Down the other end, I've got my warping board. I'm going to use that. These pegs right here are going to become my project pegs, because if I put my warping peg right at the end of the table, it'd be too long for this warp. I want about 65 inches for this project, and so I've measured that out already, and these pegs will be great, and then that gives me also multiple pegs. You of course don't have to have a warping board for this project, just use what you have. If you normally use a direct warping peg, or 2 is even better, 3 if you have them. Just use what you have on hand. So back to the back of the loom here. I've got my apron rod all set up. I've got my heddle sitting here in neutral, and I'm going to just set up the heddle rod stabilizers. So the loom comes with some Texolve cord. If you've already seen my low yarn flex rigid heddle review, you have probably seen this part already. But you can just pop some Texolve cord over the end of the metal rod, and then you can bring that up, and there's a little screw sticking out that you can also just pop your Texolve cord over. The cord has holes in it all through, so this is like a treadle cord if you're familiar with that. And then I can do the same on the other side, and then I don't have to worry about my apron rod flopping all over the place once I start warping. And of course you can adjust the cord to whatever length is going to be suitable for you. Okay, so now that's going to be nice and stable, and I don't have to worry about it. I can actually drop it down. I'm going to drop it down a little bit because it's sitting a little high. And do the same to the other side. This is pretty simple to just pull it off and adjust it to the height that is going to work for you. I guess what I'm trying to do is just sort of align it a bit better with the actual heddle. Okay, so that feels about right to me. And as far as marking out the heddle, if you've seen any of my videos before, I often do mark out the width of the project on the heddle, but we're actually going to be warping this whole thing, so there's no point for me to do that. I've got all of my yarns gathered here ready to go. As I mentioned to you before, I don't know the exact layout, but I'm going to figure that out as we go along, and that's going to be fun. So let's get started. All right, so just starting at one end. When I'm warping the rigid heddle loom, I like to warp from the back right to left, but that's not a rule, you don't have to do that. That's just what I'm doing for this project. So I've decided to start with this is actually like a pink, but it often shows as red on the camera. It's a very deep pink, and I'm going to knock that onto my apron rod, just right behind where I want to actually start. A double knot is sufficient. So for me, I'm going to call this first slot here my first slot rather than the slot next to the hole here, because I'm going to be threading into the holes once I'm finished warping, and I want the end warp thread to be in a hole, and the same on the other side as well. That's going to give us more consistent edges. So I'm going through the slot. That's going to give me 2 ends in that slot, and then we will thread that afterwards. I'm not going to thread every slot and every hole because that would double my set for that section, and I want a set of 10 for this section. That's right for the yarn that I've got. So I'm going to pull that loop through, and then I'm going to put it on the peg that is nearest to that side of the loom, which is this one. And as I said, I'm just going to move across the pegs, because I have them there, I might as well use all of them and distribute the warp over that way. So I'm actually going to be changing colours very frequently, which means it takes a little longer to warp, but for a project like this, it's a fairly short length. And like I said, I want to get like a real riot of colour in there. So it's going to be a lot of changing, and I am going to choose to tie off and then tie on my new colours rather than try and do a continuous thing. So I'm looking at my next colour now. I think I'm going to, let me see. Let me see, I'm really not sure. I look at all these colours here and I'm like, oh, that one. No, that one. I am thinking about which colours sit well next to one another. And for me, I don't like yellow and green sitting next to each other. I never have, but I do like yellow and blue. But I do like green and blue. And I do like, say, purple and yellow sitting next to each other. And those two sitting next to the pink would also be fine. Okay, I just mapped out in my mind what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do the yellow next. And just drop that to the floor, tie it on. And again, I'm just going to do the very next slot. So the slot that comes next to the pink, and then take that to the peg. I'm putting on the same peg that I put the pink on. Back here again, I'm going to cut that, knot it off, and then my next colour. So I said I don't like green next to yellow. I don't know if I said that I don't really like blue next to yellow either. So I'm not going to do either of those. I did say that I like purple next to yellow. So that's what I'm going to do. Drop that ball. Tie it on. So you can see this isn't going to be a particularly quick process. If you're doing this yourself, tying off lots of different colours, you might want to space the time out a bit so that you're not doing all the warping at once. Depends on your own needs. Now I'm going through the very next slot. So for me, in this first section, I'm not going to have any more than 2 ends of each colour in each section. If that's too much for you, you might want to do 2 slots of each colour. You might want to do random colours, whatever feels good to you for this project. Okay, so now I've got a choice between whether I do the blue or the green next. Those are my 2 remaining colours as far as for the tendent section. And I'm thinking that I really like green next to purple. So I'm going to do the green and then I'll do the blue. And then we have a loose kind of a plan. And then I'll probably just come back and repeat that from the pink. I have a lot of different colours of yarn, thankfully. This is actually a hand-dyed one. I dyed this with natural dye. Actually, it was I believe it was a red onion skins. Yep, that's what you can get from red onion skins. I've got a class on natural dyeing. I'll leave a link for it down below. It's really fascinating. Dyeing with natural dyes. All right, so that's my green. And then we'll finish up that first part of the repetition with the blue. And now I've got my yarn balls all over the floor. That's okay, I'll just have to tidy them in between tying on the colours, otherwise I'm going to end up with a tangle for sure. It's bound to happen eventually. Okay, this blue should set off the green nicely. So as I pointed out already, this is a very different kind of project for me with this real riot of colour. But, you know, I think it's about time I did something like this. And not just the colour, but using the variable dents and using the sari silk yarns. It's just all so fun. Okay, so that's my first colour repetition. So now I could do something, anything. I could do anything. Like I could repeat the blues for a few slots and then go back into this repetition. I could do completely random colours, as I already said, but I think I'm going to cycle back through the colours. Even if I don't get a complete repetition back in, I'm okay with that because it's that kind of project. I'm not concerned with everything looking really perfect. I do like me a bit of symmetry, and I'm going to have symmetry in this piece at least to some degree, but it doesn't have to be exact symmetry. All right, so back into the next slot with this dark pink again. I'm pretty pleased with my colour choices so far. I think this is going to pop in just the way I hoped it would. So after that pink, I've got the yellow. These are lovely, strong colours, which of course were inspired by my sari silk yarns because they have such a, do you want to just have another look at them? Such a range of colours in them that, you know, all of these colours that I'm warping now are going to be picked up by this yarn and the other one. And this one's going to be really interesting too because it's also got some earthy tones. It's got some kind of garish tones. It's got sparkles. It's got dark tones. It's got everything. I can't believe I have not woven a project like this yet. Like, what am I even doing with my weaving life if I haven't done a project like this yet? I guess it's just the perfect timing. And I'm very happy to be collaborating with Low Yarn on this project too. All right, so after the yellow, I'm going to pop some purple in there again. This is kind of a light, warmish purple. Which is really nice. So remember, for this section, all of these yarns are fingering weight wool. I got mine from Bendigo Woolen Mills. It's where I get a lot of my woolen yarn. So if you're in Australia, you might want to check them out. Their luxury 4-ply is what it's called. As I said, I'll have all these details in the actual pattern for you, but just in case you want to take a quick look. And then if you're not in Australia, of course, you will be using something different. And that is absolutely fine. There are a lot of beautiful fingering weight yarns out there that are in wool, and you don't even have to use wool. You can use a cotton or something else that you might have, an acrylic. I would go by the yarn weight, so fingering weight for the 10 dent heddles, if that's what you have, and by the colours. Let the colours guide you. Yes, because this project is all about colour. All right, now back into the blue. So don't worry, I'm not going to take you through this entire warping process in real time because that would just, we'd just be here for a bit of a while. That might be a bit too long. And I'm just showing you a couple of repeats of this section, and then I'll come back to you when I've completed this section and we'll start on the different sizes. All right, so I'm not putting a ton of tension on the yarn when I'm putting it on the peg. Remember, we don't want to do that because this part is about having a bit of consistency in the warp. So you can see there that I've got plenty of room in my warp, but it's all kind of at a consistent level. There aren't any bits that are so slack that they're sitting on the table, and then other bits that are so tight that they're pulling. Okay, so just that bit of consistency. Be soft with your yarn when you're taking the loop through to the peg, and then you won't have trouble with the peg wanting to come this way or the loom wanting to go that way or whatever it is, because we achieve that warp tension a little bit later. We don't need to do it right now. Okay, so I've cycled back all the way back to my pink again. So I'll continue with this and I'll meet up with you in just a moment when I get to the first section of the 2.5 dent. All right, so that is my first section done, and as it turns out, I did get a full color repeat in here, which I didn't plan. It just came out perfectly like that. So I went through the full color sequence again. I just wanted to point out here that when we go around the front of the loom and we start the threading, we're going to be threading to the holes to the left. And so that last blue loop there is going to be threaded in this hole, which means for this hole, we need to use this particular slot here, just to avoid confusion there. So I've got one of my sari silk yarns. It's the yarn, not the ribbon. And that's the next one that I'm going to pop in there. So I'm going to knot that. I'm just going on the other side of my Texolve cord there on the apron rod because I've come to that point. So I'm going to give this a good knot, double knot on there. And then I'm going to take that through that next slot there. So count this as a slot, even though it's much larger, and count this as a slot. All right, so that's 2 ends in that slot for the 2.5 dent, and then that brings me to the 5 dent. So I need to cut this yarn, knot that onto the apron rod, again with a nice double knot. These knots are going to be a bit bulky just because the yarn is bulky, and that's okay. All right, and then I'm going to bring in my silk, my sari ribbon yarn. This one's really interesting because it has all of these, natural fraying has led to all of these threads being everywhere. And that was also part of the appeal for me, is to use something really different like that, because I'm usually doing pretty precise and very neat kind of weaving. And so it was another part of my endeavour to step outside of my comfort levels and have a go at something else. Now, I just haven't knotted that with a long enough tail to make it a double knot, so I'll give it a bit more space. Double knot that. And then we'll go to the next slot. So it's going to be this one. So again, we'll end up threading to this hole once we get to the threading stage. Now I'm just using the threading hook to pull that through, but then I'm sort of abandoning the threading hook and pulling through with my fingers because this yarn is so catchy and frayy. And then I'm going to do the exact same for the next slot. So we'll get 2 lengths out of this one without cutting it. This is going to be really interesting. Where are we getting caught there? Some of this ribbon yarn does actually have knots in it, so I want to pay attention to where the knots are. I just came across a knot, but it was very close to the other end, so I'm going to leave it in. If it's close to the end, then it's okay. because it's going to be part of the loom waist anyway. But you don't really want, well, you definitely don't want a knot in the middle of your warp. So if you are using a similar yarn and it has a knot in the middle of it, like most of these strips, they're sewn together, but occasionally they're knotted together. And so you would just want to cut out the knot part and not use that part unless it's right near the end. Okay, so now that one's done, I can bring back the sari yarn for the next slot. Right there. And then I'll cut and knot that one again. So now I'm at another section of 10 dents, but it's not the same number as before. So what I actually want to do right now is count the number of slots that I'm going to be using for this next section to see if I use the same color repeat, will I get the same, will I be able to fit them in the same? And if not, then what am I going to do? I'm going to decide what to do. So let me count the slots. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, counting that one. All right. 12 slots, and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 colors. So I'm not going to get a repeat of colors in there like I have at the sides. So that makes me think, well, maybe I'll do something a little different for these parts. So I could do more repeats of certain colors. I could do completely random and not think about it too much, but I'm thinking that I do want some sort of, I'd like these sections probably to look the same. So let me think about it for a second, I'll let you know. All right, easy decision. I'm going to break them into groups of 3. So I'm going to do 3 repeats of each color that I use. Looking at the colors, I'm not going to think about it too much. I'm just thinking, well, I saw this blue sitting on the floor and I like the blue, so it's going first. And that is my design process at the moment. Okay, so the next slot, going into the 10 dent section again, and I'm going to do 3 repeats of this. I have moved to a different peg, by the way. I've moved along in the peg world by now because I'm getting closer to the middle of the loom. So this one's going to be 3 slots. So I can get a little more done a little more quickly this time because I'm not changing up the colors with every slot. Okay, that's 3 of the blue. Then I'm going to bring the green back in. So it'll be 3 of green for the next 3 slots. And then I'll cut that one off. Then I'm going to bring in my purple. Three slots of purple. Then this idea just came to me as I was finishing the purple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do, so I've got 3 slots left, right? I'm going to do 1 slot of pink, followed by a slot of yellow, and then a slot of pink again. So the yellow will be like a pop in between the 2 pinks. All right, so that's 1. I'm going to leave that pink to be continuous so I don't have to cut it, because I'm going to use it again just in a moment. Bring my yellow. Through here. And I can cut that one because I'm only doing 1 slot of yellow. And then I'll bring my pink back and I'll finish up with that into this big slot here. And then we're ready to move back into the sari yarns again. So in comes this yarn first. And that's going to go into the next big slot. All right, and then the ribbon. It's cool bringing the ribbon back in because each length is different, so you just don't know what you're going to get. It's completely random. I'm not really sure how this is going to hold up in the warp over time. The friction may be, like of beating, may be an issue. I mean, the middle of the ribbon is very strong, but the edges are not. They're fraying and weaker. All right, that is a big knot. Okay, so into the slot. Then I'll just pull it through with my fingers. Moving to another peg. And then that one's going to go around and through the next slot. Getting a little bit hard to see what's happening here because of the bulk of this ribbon. All right. Another length of the sari yarn. Where did I put my hook? That's right there. Okay, so that's going to go through that last large slot. And then for the next section of 10 dent heddles here, what I want to do is repeat this section but in reverse because it's over the other side of the loom now. So that means that I will start with the pink and the yellow and then move out to the blue like I have on this way, as though it's moving out instead of just repeating blue through to the other colours. I hope that makes sense what I just said. So I'm starting with the pink. And I'm going to tie on the other side of this apron rod of the Texsolve cord. And we'll go through the next heddle. So remember I had the pink and then the yellow and then the pink again. So I'm repeating that. One slot of each, and then we go into the 3 slots for the other colours. Well, I have to say I've never had a warp look quite like this before. I did mention the fraying of the ribbon before and not sure how that's going to stand up as the warp, but my hope is that because it is threaded in these spaces where it has more space because of the very dent heddles, then I'm hoping that it's going to be okay. You live and learn, hey? I tend to be a bit of an optimist when it comes to my weaving projects, so I feel good about it. I feel like it's just going to be okay. All right, so that's the last pink for that section. And then what do we do? Purple. So 3 of purple is next. The next colour was green. And we do 3 of those as well. It's actually getting a little bit harder for me to see from that side. So when that happens, I come behind the loom and have a proper look at what I'm doing so I don't miss any slots, and it's also easier on my back if I do it that way. All right, that's 3 of those, and then 3 of the blue, and then we're back to our sari yarns again. Cut that one. So I'll do my sari yarns for this section next, and then I'll come back to show you exactly what I'm going to do for the last 10 dent section. On this last section of the 10 dent heddles, I want to mimic what I've done on the other side, but I want to do a mirror image of it, similar to what I did right here, so that I'm copying. So on the other end, I finished up with the pink as my last one, and I want that to happen for this side as well. So when I look at my sequence, the very last color that I finished with working towards the middle was blue. So I'm going to grab my blue and put that in the same position as it is on the other side to make a mirror image. So I'm still mixing my colors up in the same way that I was, but I'm doing it so that it's going to look the same on each side. So going through my next slot. So you remember on the far side when we just began, I only did 1 slot of each color and I changed them all up. So that is exactly what I'm going to do over here. So again, I'm back to tying on and tying off as I go. The next color next to the blue is green. And I literally have my yarns all over the floor now, so I'm kind of stepping over them all as I go. None of them have tangled up yet, which is nice. These yarns that I'm using, they're all in big balls, so it's not as easy to organize them on the floor. I usually just drop them on the floor and let them roll around, which is not the best idea. It's good to be able to put them in a box or something to contain them so that they're not rolling off everywhere. Next was purple. Yarn cakes can be a good option if you are warping off the floor, because yarn cakes will sit flat, whereas balls will roll around. And I do have a ball winder that makes yarn cakes, but do you think that I'm going to take the time to reball all of these balls of yarn? Not likely. I'll just deal with them rolling around. You guys know me by now, I'm not going to put in the extra time to do things like that. No, we don't need to talk about the L word. Lazy. So now I'm still following the same color sequence. And then the last color to go right through the sequence is that hot pink. And this pink has featured in so many of my weaving projects. If you go back through them, you will see it very frequently. It is definitely one of my faves. All right. That's the complete color sequence. So now I go back to the start and just repeat that over again until I get to the end. So I'll meet you there when I get there. Okay, so I've just warped the very last slot, and I wanted to show you that this slot does actually come up against the green bracket. And when we come to threading, we're actually going to remove one of these slot threads, so it's just going to be in the hole there, because as I mentioned, we want to have hole threads on both sides, but that is how it looks now. To begin warping the loom, I am going to take these clamps off my warping board that has been clamped to the table, and I'm going to leave all of my yarn loops on these pegs. You might have seen me do something similar in one of my YouTube videos at various times, where I leave the yarn actually around the pegs, or the peg, depending on how many I'm using, and then use that tension of, or the weight of the warping board to start winding it towards me. So I'm going to start to rotate that towards me. Once I get a full rotation of the yarn over this beam and onto itself, then I'm going to start inserting some paper. I also need to remove these Texov cords that have done their job for me, because they're going to stop me from being able to continue to rotate that warp back towards me. Okay. So slowly the warping board is coming towards me and acting as just a light tension on the loom. Okay, so now I'm going to insert my paper. This piece I have might be a little bit long. We'll see how we go. Just straightening up my paper. Okay, then once I've got my paper in, then I can start to come to the front to tug on the warp to give me that little bit extra tension as I'm going. I'm going to have a good tug on the paper as well. And then keep going. Tug again from the front. Straighten up my paper a little bit. That's bringing the warp up pretty close now. So I'll be ready to take these loops off in just a moment. All right, the loops are popping off now, so that's my sign to stop and cut my loops. And if you're using a similar method and you don't want your loops to pop off like that, you can get to it before that happens. You can also secure the, you can secure your loops if you want to by tying them with some choke ties. If you miss a loop, it's no big stress, you just come back. Once you usually find the loop, once you start threading, and you can just cut it there and then, it's not a big deal. Okay, loops are all cut. We are ready to thread. Ready to start threading. So I'm threading from the left-hand side across to the right, and I'm grabbing the first slot thread and I'm having a look how it's sitting at the back beam. So I'm trying to keep the threads in order to avoid twisting at the back beam. That just makes for a happier warping and weaving experience. And I'm going to thread that one through the first hole, and the other one is going to stay in the slot. So we are just threading for plain weave, which is pretty straightforward. And each of these to begin with, obviously we're in the 10 dent section right now, they're all going to go the same way. One in the thread, one in the hole, one in the slot. And so you'll have one color of each in the hole and slot, because that's how we did the color layout. I'm threading my loom on the stand. You don't have to have a stand, of course, though I can tell you quite honestly that it's so much more comfortable to weave with a loom on a stand, at least for myself. I find that way more comfortable. And then with an adjustable chair, I also use. So I can put the height up or I can put it down, and it's very comfortable for me. While I'm threading, I can get in, you can see I'm pretty close into the loom. I've tucked the chair over the front rail, the stabilizing rail of the floor stand. And so I'm in about as close as I can get. And I find that for any type of threading, whatever loom it is, the closer I am, the more likely I am to avoid back pain later. I'm thinking maybe with all these colours and everything that I've used, we should call this the circus pillow. Feels like a circus to me, in a good way. Okay, so that's the first whole section for the first lot of 10 dent. And now we come to the 2.5 dent. So that is the sari yarn. And so I'm going to grab the first bit of that and pull it through the hole. You probably just want to use your hook just in the first part and then replace it with your finger, because the hook might grab on and split these plies and end up making a bit of a mess. So that's the first one, and then we come to the ribbon. So I've got 2 ends of ribbon in this slot, and I'm going to grab one end of that, pull it through the hole. Again, I'll replace it with my finger once I get there. So that's those 2 ends, and then the same again. That's actually, that's the piece with the knot. So that is not going to go through the hole. So for that reason, I'm going to take the other piece and pull that through the hole. So you remember that knot that I spoke about at the start? It's right there. But it's going to be, once I tie it on, it's going to be almost at the apron rod. So it's not going to affect anything else. It's just I couldn't get it through that hole. All right, and then we're back to the sari yarn. And then we're back into another 10 dent section. And so we're always taking one from the slot and putting one in the hole to the left, regardless of whether it's a 10 dent section or something else. And this time, of course, we'll have more repeats of the same colour because that's what we did in the warping colour order. But you'll still have 2 ends in every slot so that you can take one of those and thread them through the hole. ready to start weaving, all we have to do now is separate the warp. You will often see me in my videos using cardboard separators, the sticks that often come with your loom, to separate my warp. And normally I would do that because it's a quick and easy option. Today I'm using waste yarn, and one of the main reasons that I'm doing that today in particular is that I ended up, when I tied on, with quite a bit more fringe than I intended at this end. That's fine because I'm actually incorporating fringe as a feature into the actual pillow project. But it just means that I don't want to be creating more waste at this end at this point. And so the waste yarn will help me to create less. So I'm just going to pop into the down position. Now, as I've already noticed when I tested out my Heddles earlier, these ribbons that are quite thick are going to want to kind of sit down rather than up when they're supposed to be up. And so that's just something I'm going to have to be mindful of throughout the project and make sure that they are in the correct shed before I actually weave it. So I've got a thickness of waste yarn here. I'm just going to work that through by hand. Got 4 lengths of it here. And I'm just going to pop them down at the bottom. Then I'll put the heddle up and feed off a bit more waste yarn. I'll just do about 3 times the width approximately. You just want to leave enough that you have some hanging over the ends when you're done, so it's easy to remove afterwards. And again, I'm just checking that that ribbon is where it's supposed to be. Here's a classic example. This piece of ribbon here is sitting right up as though it belongs to the holes, but it actually belongs to a slot. So as soon as I poke it, it goes back down. So that's going to be a cheeky one. I'll have to keep an eye on it. Same thing over here, but I'm aware of it. And I can show you some extra ways to clear the shed easily once we get going, which we are just about to do. Okay, I'm going to beat those right down. And then I'll pop into the down shed for one more go with the waste yarn. Again, I'll just do about 3 times the width. And again, I'm checking that all my yarns are in their correct sheds. Okay, one more beat. And then of course that's going to continue to come together as I continue to weave, but that's pretty good at the moment. I'm pretty happy with how that is. So I'm going to begin in the up shed. So I'll pop into there right away and I'll check my shed first for those naughty ribbons. And my tension could be a little bit tighter. Now what I have over here is I have all of the wool yarns that I warped with, and they are all on shuttles. Now don't freak out if you see all my shuttles and think I don't have that amount of shuttles. That's fine, because there's always a way around things. You can make extra shuttles out of cardboard. You can just make little balls of yarn that you can pass through. You can use less weft yarns because, as I've already said, this project is very adaptable for whatever you want to do. I haven't really worked out a system for the colours yet, but I do think that I like these three colours most of all. Hang on, let's get them out. So the pink, the blue and the purple. And then I'll probably use the green and the yellow more as pops here and there. And so less frequent repeats of those. And then I still have leftovers of my ribbon yarn and of my sari yarn. So I can also put them in as pops of colour. I'm not going to put them on shuttles. There's not a lot of it here, and I'm going to use them somewhat sparingly, just to occasionally to go across to kind of to have that colour pop and that little bit of different texture or something different happening on the way through, but will also tie in absolutely with what I've already done with the warping. So what I'll do instead of winding them on a shuttle is just cut the length that I need, because I'm really only planning to do one pick at a time of either of these. So I'll just cut the length that I need and I'll tuck the ends in, and that will work out just fine. And I don't need to worry about a shuttle. So these two, I'll just pop them aside for a moment, because as I said, I'm not going to be using them as frequently. And I think I will start even in this order. So purple, then blue, and then pink. So I'll keep all those shuttles with me, and I will start, let's see, I actually want to start in the down shed. I'm going to start on the right hand side because I'm going to hem stitch this edge. This is going to become actually part of the feature of the pillow. So two things. I hem stitch from the right, so I want to create my tail from the right, so I'm going to make that about 4 times the width of the warp, or thereabouts. And then the other thing is that when I'm doing plain weave, I like to have my shuttle coming in from the right when I'm in the down shed, and that's one way that I keep track of where what shed I'm in, what shuttle I have on which side. And I've done that for so long that it just feels right for me to have my shuttle on the right hand side when I am in the down shed. And so if I deviate from that, it feels weird. And my brain starts telling me, no, you've done something wrong here. So yeah, I've trained myself to do that. So the tail for the hem stitch, I've just dropped that down by the side. It's going to sit there until I've done a little bit of plain weave, and then I'll come back. So my first beat is the purple, and I'm going to keep going with the purple. I have not decided for how long yet. So as far as clearing the shed goes, I don't actually have a pickup stick right next to me, but I do have a spare shuttle. So I'll just use a spare shuttle, use a pickup stick if you have one or whatever it is, to just go into that shed quickly and make sure that all the threads are where they should be. You can give them a beat down if, you know, some of these fibers are coming off and sticking to other fibers and all of that. It's not the most straightforward warp because we are using those novelty yarns, and they will give us their own unique way of weaving. So clearing the shed is going to be necessary, I can see, to progress with this. And that might improve as I go along, or, you know, it might even get worse because I'm going back and forth with the Heddle, and that might upset the fibers, and they might be like, well, I'm just going to get all fluffy on you just to give you a hard time. But it's okay because we're smarter than the fibers. We can figure it out and say, well, okay, you want to give me a hard time? I know what to do. I'll got all these tricks up my sleeve. So that's my third pick of purple. And I think I'll do one more before I change colours. So here we go again. Popping these down. It's really only the ribbon yarn that is sticking to itself and causing any problems. Everything else is behaving beautifully. And it's really just because the ribbon yarn is has such frayed edges. Okay, so back into down. I'm going to leave that weft yarn. I'm not going to cut it. And then I'll bring in my blue on that side. And I'll leave a little tail hanging off. And then I'll show you what we do with that in just a moment. But because I'm planning to use these colours fairly continuously, I don't have to cut and change them every time. All right, so I've left a tail of a couple of inches at the right hand side. As I bring that in, I'm going to beat, change sheds, and then we'll deal with the tail. So there is my tail, and I've changed sheds. So all I have to do is go into the shed, and I like to go around 3 to 4 warp threads deep. Okay, that's just my preference, and I tuck that tail in, pull it in, and just snug it up a little bit, just so we don't have a big loop hanging off the side. And then I just continue to weave, and that is how we weave the tail in. So continuing with the blue in the up shed and adjusting those ribbons as I go across. So I did 4 of the purple, and I will do the same of the blue. That's 2. That's 3, and one more. And then I'll change to my pink. So the same as I did when I changed the blue, I'm going to leave that, bring in the pink on this side, and leave a little tail as I go. Go into the up shed and then tuck that tail just the same as I did with the blue. Down shed. Up shed. And that'll be my 4th pick of pink. Now I'll bring in my yellow. And this time I'm in the down shed, but this time I'm going to bring it in from the left, and that's just because I don't want to have too much of a build-up of tails on the right that I've tucked in, because that can get bulky after a little while. So it's good if you can distribute the tails. So I'm just doing that by coming in on the opposite side. I'm only doing 2 picks of yellow, so both of my tails will end up on the left, leaving the tail there. And then up. I'll tuck that tail on the left into that up shed, and then I'll come across and complete my second yellow pick. And because I'm only doing 2 rows of yellow at a time and not so frequently, then I'm going to cut that yarn and tuck the tail in. So you'll notice when you are weaving that the areas that you weave across, the thicker areas, they're going to be quite different to the thinner areas. When you beat, they're going to sit a little bit differently on those thicker parts of yarn. So really the challenge is just to try to beat quite evenly as much as you can. Now, where are we up to? That was the up shed, so I'll go into the down shed to tuck that tail in. Put my yellow aside, and then I'm going to restart with the purple, and then the blue and pink, and then the yellow again. And then I'll decide whether I want to put in my first pick of one of these yarns. I'll see. As I said, I want to be a bit sparing with them because I don't have a huge amount left once you consider the whole project. Now, I'm bringing my purple back. Remember, we didn't cut the tail, and so we're just going to come straight back in. That does mean that we're going to have a little loop running up the side between the weft colours, and I'm fine with that because that's going to be buried in a seam once we actually finish the project. And even if it wasn't, it's the kind of project where you could get away with having things running, weft yarns running up the side. It wouldn't really look out of place because it's just that kind of project where it's a little bit different. So again, I'll do the 4 repeats of each of those colours, making sure that my ribbons are in their correct sheds as I go. So I'm just checking and paying extra attention to my beat. So far I'm pleased with how these novelty yarns are behaving, because I did have some concerns about the fraying, that it would really be an issue and get in the way. And while there is definitely fraying and it is in the way a little bit, you can get around it. And I don't think it's going to get too bad, and that's really the Very Dent Heddles, giving them the extra space so that they're not constantly in friction with each other and with other yarns that are running next to them. Okay, so that's the 4th. And then into down. And then we swap to the blue. So again, the blue's just been sitting at the side. If you didn't want the loops of weft colour at the side, you could either cut and restart every colour, or you could interlink the different colours at the weft edges as you weave them. That would take a little bit of extra time because you'd be organising 3 shuttles. And so really, at this stage, I'm not going to bother to do that. This is the third pick. Now I did think ahead a little bit with the possibility of excessive fraying with these yarns on the loom and possibly causing trouble. A couple of ways they could cause trouble is by, like I can see this piece right here, is that particular fabric is fraying more than others around it. That could become a problem by the time it gets to the back of the heddle, especially the ones that are through the holes, because that fraying could actually create like a little block, as in it would block the yarn from feeding through properly. So I've already thought about that because I knew that could be a possibility, and I'm open to the idea of possibly trimming some yarns if they became really unruly and meant that I couldn't progress with the project, basically, if they were that bad. So I would be crossing that bridge if and when I come to it, and of course if that happens I will share it with you what I plan to do. I don't see it being a real issue at this stage. I think it'll be okay. So now I'm back to the pink for another 4 picks. If you're brand new to weaving, a pick is just a weft row. So besides blocks of colour, of course, if you wanted to do something different, you could also have a certain number of colours and do 1 row of each colour. So that would give you more of like an overall tiny colour pop effect, rather than what this gives you is kind of little squares or flattish squares. I guess they're really triangles. Triangles on their sides, if you like. Because of course the more colour you have of each repeat, then the more you're going to build a shape or a block of colour. If you just alternate your colours through, hang on, there we go. That was a little bit of frayed thread somewhere that was kind of holding the shuttle back, but I found another path through. All right, now I'll grab my yellow again and I'll just do the same as I did before. Repeat that colour progression of 2. Into up and then pausing just to tuck that tail in. I'll be stopping to hem stitch before too long, but I'm going to just continue on weaving a little bit more, and what I've decided to do at this point is to leave off with the blue and the pink for a little while and continue on with a bit of a chunk of purple. So where I had the blue and the pink wefts here, I'm just going to cut them, leaving tails that can just hang out there for a little while, remembering that this is going to be our seam, so it's not going to be seen. The seam will not be seen. All right, so I'm just going to continue on for a little while with plain weave with the purple, and then I'm planning to bring in a couple of accents in the form of the novelty yarns. But I haven't decided just yet just exactly how I'll do that. So I'll carry on here for a little bit first, do my hem stitch, and then I'll have more of an idea of how I want it to look. The Low Yarn Flex Rigid Heddle is such a fantastic loom. It's really sturdy and it has a unique heddle system because you can take apart the top and the bottom rails of the heddle and you can place heddle segments within there. And so you can mix up your heddle sizes. It's really very versatile, and you can also only put in as many segments as you need for the width of the project that you're weaving. I have my Flex on a stand and I really recommend this because it makes for very comfortable weaving. Just a little reminder that I am a reseller for Low Yarn products in Australia, and so if you're interested in any of their products you can contact me for further details. For the US, feel free to use one of my affiliate links down below. And also, if you go on the Low Yarn website, they have a list of their resellers all over the world, so be sure to check that out. Thank you again to Low Yarn for sponsoring today's video. So I've ended up doing 1 inch of purple and then 1/2 inch of the green. And now I'm going to take the opportunity to bring in the sari yarn. So I'm just going to cut a length that is just the right width for this project with a little bit extra on each end so that I can do something with the ends afterwards. But as I said, just cutting a length of that rather than loading it up in a shuttle when I've already got so many shuttles loaded, and I can just pull that through. Okay, beat that into place. And then I'm going to follow that up with another 1/2 inch of green and another inch of purple. But before I do that, I'm going to stop right here because I do need to get this hem stitch done. I really need to advance my warp at this point, but I can't do that till my hem stitch is done because I can't have the bottom of the weaving disappear over here, then I don't get to hem stitch it at all. So I'll just pop into neutral for that. I am doing a 4-1 hem stitch as outlined in your free pattern. And I'm not going to show you the entire hem stitch just for the simple reason that I have other hem stitch videos here on YouTube already, and I can just refer you to those. We'll have a look at the start of the hem stitch together, and then I'll send you on your merry way to have a look at the other videos if you need to do that. I have a couple of different hem stitching videos. The first one I will link to will be relevant to this part of the hem stitching at the start of your work, and then later I'll link to the other one that will be relevant to the end of the hem stitch. So the main thing to think of here is you don't want to hem stitch your waste yarn into the work. So I'm just pushing that down a little with the needle as I go, just to ensure that it doesn't get caught up in my way. It is quite a different colour, so I'm probably not going to have to worry about it not being visible. I'm going to start by just doing 1 stitch underneath the first warp thread, and I do that as a kind of a lock stitch. I guess a bit of an anchor. Now I've got my very long yarn here. Okay, waste yarn out of the way, and I'll count off my first 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 weft thread in. Make sure that goes through the loop on the way through. And there's my first hem stitch. Then I will go down behind the work, count off the next 1, 2, 3, 4, come up 1 weft thread in, pull that through, and then I'll scoop back down, and pull up that knot. All right, next up, go down, just getting that waist yarn out of my way, down and then up 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, it can be a bit hard to see when we're all squished together like this. If you count off an extra thread, don't worry about it. It's okay. And then scoop back to the start underneath the whole bunch. Okay, well, I'll keep going all the way across, and you can have a look at the reference video that I've given you. I won't show you the rest of this right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, see you soon when we are back to the weaving. Friends, I wanted to point out as well that I am doing something a little bit different when I get to the thicker parts of this warp. If I try to do a hem stitch and I include 4 threads for these thicker threads, well, for the ribbon, it's like that entire section, which is really too wide for a hem stitch to be able to hold as effectively. So the way that I've counted that is I'm actually doing 1 hem stitch all through these tendon sections. But when I come to the thicker sections, I'm breaking it down into 2, okay? So 2 warp threads, still going in 1 weft thread deep, but I'll show you just what that looks like. So I've got the 1, 2 sari yarns here. I'm coming up between them. I'm coming up after them, and I've got my 1 weft thread there. It might be a little difficult for you to see, especially with all there's so much busyness going on here. But there's a little purple weft thread running right across there, and I'm coming up above that, pulling my needle through, and then going back to the start of those 2 sari yarns, scooping down as I normally would, and coming up underneath them. That gives me a bunch of 2 just in those sections, and that means that I can tighten up that hem stitch knot nicely, whereas if it was 4, it just wouldn't hold it properly. Okay, so for the next part, I've got the 2 silk ribbons. I'm doing them together as well. Okay, so I'm coming over up above that purple weft thread again. Then I'm scooping back to where I went in and coming up below the weft thread this time, and that's in order to cinch up that into a bunch so that it's going to do its actual job of a hem stitch. I'm going to tighten it, and you can see it's pulled it together, so it's going to hold those threads together, whereas a larger amount it may not. And so for the entirety of that section, so let's see, there'll be 1, 2, 3, 4 parts where you do a 2-1 hem stitch instead. And it's easy to remember because you can see just by looking at it, well, this is a lot. This is a lot of thickness to put into 4 warp threads for a hem stitch. And so you'll remember and be like, okay, yes, I've got to break them into 2s instead. So working my way across, I've got my last 2 right here. And then That's all my groups of 2, and now I'm moving back into 4s for the rest of it. As I begin to advance my warp more and come around this front bar, I'm going to want to put in a cardboard separator as I go because of the thickness of some of these yarns. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of our warp, we had quite a lot of knots, and the knots were bulky as we tied onto the apron rod. So I'm using this thicker paper. This one is like maybe from the inside of some wrapping paper, that kind of stuff. You know, they put it inside the actual wrapping paper to give it structure, and it's a little bit thicker than the regular paper that I use to roll on. So that's going to feed around that front roller as I continue to advance, but I can see that it's not quite ready to go around that front roller yet. So I will continue on. Tighten up my warp a bit and carry on. So another thing that I want to do when the warp starts coming over that front bar is I want to start measuring to see how far I've come. So I measure just from the first bit of weaving that I've done. I don't measure from the waste yarn because that's not going to be part of the weaving. So I've got about 6.5 inches so far, and usually I'll put a pin or some sort of marker right there. Don't have a pin on hand, but I'll remember to get one when I get up. So 6.5 inches so far, and that tells me how much further I need to keep weaving. So you can see here that I've done a couple of repeats of the purple and green novelty yarn, then green and purple as a kind of mirror image thing. And then I've put in some of the sari ribbon, and then I'm going to go right back to the start of the sequence. So the start of the sequence, we began with 4 picks of purple, and so that's where I'm up to. And I think I'm in the up shed, but let me check. Yes, up shed. Okay, so it's just starting back from that sequence, and this is what I think that I will do throughout, repeat throughout. And if you want to follow that repeat with me, that will be in your weaving pattern just as I've woven it here, so that if I haven't been clear enough in the video, which is somewhat likely, it will all be written there for you, so you can follow along with the video and the pattern at the same time. Another thing that I've done at this stage that I will just mention is a couple of things actually. I've put some weights on the back of some of the ribbons, so over the back of the loom, just because I'm using wool with, so this is likely a polyester. Some of it will be cotton, some of it will be rayon. You know, it's a whole mix of different types of fibers, and so they have different rates of stretch. And so that means that in some places my ribbon is quite a bit looser as the warp, and I expected that, and that's fine. So I've just put some weights to help them have a little more tension on them at the back, and I've just used those S weights that I use so frequently. I'll try to remember to link to those down below, or they'll be linked in the pattern or somewhere, somehow. And then the other thing that I had to do was I had to actually reduce the bulk of one of the ribbons that was threaded in a hole, and it wasn't knotted as a join, but it was sewn as a seam to the next piece, and it was not going to come through the hole. It was too bulky. I didn't anticipate that issue because I thought that my holes were big enough, but this was a particularly bulky seam. I didn't really allow for that. So that's something that I would know for next time. Obviously, if I do this again, use this ribbon again. And also, you know, it's fantastic for weft. It's very easy to use as the weft, but using it as the warp obviously presents a few more challenges, which we are getting through, and it's all good. But it's important for me to point these things out so that you're aware of them. So what I did was I actually, it wasn't this seam, but I actually trimmed it down a little bit because I tried to gently work it through the hole so that I could advance the warp, but it was not coming. It was too big. I didn't want to damage my heddle. I didn't want to damage my yarn, and I didn't want to have problems with my project. And so I thought that was the easiest way to deal with it. I thought as long as it holds okay, as long as that seam still holds okay. This might be the seam right here actually. Yeah. So it was in the hole here, and just that seam right there is like a double, it's like they've sewn on some extra fabric there. Yeah, it's actually 3 layers of fabric right there. I'm not sure why they did that, but they did, maybe just to make it stronger. And that has resulted in it being too bulky to come through the hole. So cutting it did allow me to pull it through the hole, and I'm thinking it's going to hold just fine, that seam is not going to come undone. It's still pretty strong, and as long as it lasts until, you know, I've woven over it and then I can get past it, then I won't have any problems because it'll then be woven in and it'll be part of the structure. So that was another little issue I had to deal with, but that actually worked out just fine. So as I said, I'm back at the start of the sequence. I'm going right through that again, and that's what I'm going to be doing for quite some time. And so by the time I meet you back here again, I'm going to be right through the warp, probably to the end, unless something else happens that I can come back and share with you that will be helpful. And I've just cut my yarn, my weft yarn, realizing I didn't actually need to because I'm distracted being a chatterbox, but it doesn't matter anyway. It's fine to have cut the yarn and make that weft discontinuous, and I'll just reintroduce it when I need to. No problem at all. So it's so adaptable, a project like this. So my progression was purple and then blue and then the pink and then the yellow. And then I go back into that other progression that I did down here of the green, purple, green, and the novelty yarns again. So that's what I'm going to repeat the whole way through. If I run out of the novelty yarn, which I don't think I will, I think I've still got enough at this point to finish because it's only one pick at a time. But if I did run out, it wouldn't really matter because there's going to be 2 sides to this pillow. And if they look different on different sides, no problem at all. I'm absolutely fine with that. So I will continue weaving, and I'll see you in a little while when we've got the next step to do. I hope you are enjoying the project, and I hope that weaving this is really fun and relaxing for you, as that is what it's all about. All right, I am finished weaving and I've left a long tail on the right hand side to hem stitch with. Now this is a different coloured yarn to what I hem stitched the beginning with, and that is absolutely fine. They don't have to match, because basically what I'm doing here now is I'm hem stitching to secure this end, but also I want to choose, once I actually have this off the loom and I can drape it over the pillow insert, I want to see which end I like more. And that will help me to determine which end I'm going to make a feature of. So one of the ends will be hem stitched but not fringe twisted, and the other end will be fringe twisted, and that will be the end that I will use. But the sari yarn and the ribbon yarn, they're different at each end, and so I'm going to see, because I don't remember what it looked like at the start, what these ribbons looked like at the start. And so once I've got it off the loom, then I can have a really good look, and I can also drape it, and that will help me to decide. So for the hem stitch, I'm doing once again the 4-1 hem stitch that I did at the start, but this time I'm doing it in reverse. I'm not going to give a really detailed tutorial about it here now, because I've got another video on YouTube that explains it in quite a lot of detail. But just as a little overview, as I start to do this, I'm going to pick off 4 warp threads. I'm going to do a lock stitch at the edge, just to make sure that that yarn is locked in there. So I'm going to take it through a loop at the edge. Okay, so now I know it's not going to draw in or do anything weird. And pick off those first 4, come in underneath 1 weft thread deep. So it's the exact same actions that we do on the other end, but we're doing them backwards. We're working back into the work instead of forward into the work. And once you see the other hem stitching video tutorials that I'm going to link to, that will make complete sense. Just in case you think I'm talking nonsense right now, I'm not. It'll make sense. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this pin because my yarn is going to get stuck in it. That was just my measuring pin. And then pull through and knot up, just like I do for the other hem stitch. Scoop down again, pick up the next 4, go in 1 weft thread deep, pull through, and then scoop back to the beginning where I started that group, scoop underneath and make sure that I pick up that yarn so that it catches through the loop and forms a knot right at the fell of the fabric there, and that's what makes our little bunches. So please do go and check out that hem stitch video if you're up to this point. The next thing that we're going to do is take this off the loom, which will be super exciting to be able to see what it's like and start to plan the next part of the project. The moment we've all been waiting for, the cut and reveal. I'm cutting it quite close to the apron rod so that I have plenty of fringe, because of what I mentioned before about choosing this end or the other end, and I'm not sure yet until I see what I've got. So I'll take the break off and away we go. Make sure my heddle doesn't come with. That one's got a knot on the other side of it, that's why it doesn't want to come. All right. And remember, on this end, I don't want to cut because I need that fringe. So I'm just going to cut, so my waste yarn has gotten wrapped around the front rod there. The rest of these knots, I'm going to undo them. And that again is going to ensure that I've got plenty of fringe. I finally decided which end I was going to use for the feature fringe, and it was really hard to decide because I like both ends equally, but I finally decided on this end, and I just have to start now. I'm thinking that this is a little bit too long, so I need to trim that up first. Let's have a measure of how long this actually is. Usually I trim this up on the table before I actually have it laid out ready to twist the fringe, but today I don't. So I'm going to trim that to about 8 inches. Doesn't have to be super exact, and I'm just going to use each last bunch as a guide for the next bunch. Because this is going to be draped over the front of the pillow, I don't want it super duper long, but I still want it long enough to be able to be twisted. Because remember, when you do a twisted fringe, it's going to contract up. And so you're going to end up with something much shorter than what you have in its untwisted state. It's going to be interesting to see how these yarns twist up together too. Okay, that's good enough. And then I'm just going to start. I'm going to do, for the fingering weight yarn, the wool, I'm going to twist that into bunches of 4 will be twisted together. So that'll be a bunch of 8. So to give you an example of what I mean by that, I'm going to attach one group of 4 to a clip and another group of 4 and another. Because remember, these are all in groups of 4 because we hem stitched it that way. Okay, so they're all together. Obviously, when I get to the other different yarns, I will again be doing different numbers because they're so much thicker. So I'll twist that up nicely. These look great, twisted, all the colours. And then I'm going to put a knot about, you know, I have to measure everything because my brain will not estimate for me, about 1 inch tails. I am really terrible at being able to look at something and say, yeah, that's an inch. I don't know. My brain was not made that way. So I have to measure everything for you guys, because if I say, oh yeah, that's about this much, and then I'm way off, oh, this is going to be the cutest fringe. So I'm going to do that again because I'm still working my way along the fingering weight yarn. I wanted to show you how much of the sari yarns I had left too, just as a point of interest. So I'll do that before I start twisting these bunches because I've got it right next to me. So from the ribbon yarn, these lengths here, couple of lengths, that's all I had left at the end of the project, so that worked out well to just have that little bit left over. And then the recycled sari yarn, I had that much left over, so that can go towards a future project. But I was happy to have enough to be able to continue the pattern that I had mapped out in the beginning. And that also means that if you end up getting the same yarns, I can tell you that you can complete the whole pillow front and back using those for both warp and weft if you do the same calculations that I have here. That will be in the pattern. All right, now what have we got left over? We've got 2 bunches of 4. So I'll treat them as I have been treating them. 1 bunch each. And then I've got these 2 sari yarns here. So I'll see if I can twist them up individually and do it like that. See how that goes. I've got no idea how they will go twisted. I know that they want to cling together and they want to cling to the others as well. So a bit different to the wall. I'll do that bunch first, and then let's see what we get with the sari. I'm actually going to try twisting that just a little bit more. Okay. Make sure they're not sticking to other things. Do the knot. And there we go. It does. It twists nicely. Not as much as the wool, obviously, but it does twist up. So that's good. And now I want to do the same with the ribbon yarns. I'm going to twist them individually and then twist 2 of them together. So we'll see how that looks. Because I've never twisted this yarn before. I just don't know. And they're so different. I guess it's going to depend. Like the stiffer yarns. Yeah, so straight away you can see the stiffer yarn is not twisting in the same way that the more elastic yarn next to it is, because they're all from different saris and they so desperately want to cling to each other and get all knotted up with their frayed threads. So I'm just separating them as I go, and that's working fine. All right, that one's had enough twist, I think, because it just wants to make its way elsewhere. Okay, I'll have to do a bigger knot for these guys, a bigger loop for the knot, and then work that down. Some of it comes off, that's okay. Oh great, that's a nice twist. So that's fine. All right, that pink one, that one got a lot of twist in it, so I'm just letting it go a little bit. And then knot that down. That stiffer fabric is a bit harder to knot, so it's a big knot, okay? I can't make that any smaller, it won't go any smaller. And it has twisted, so that worked as well. So what I can see at the moment is that the silk, that the ribbon yarns are not, they shorten up a lot more than the wool does, and they shorten up more than the recycled sari yarn does as well. And that's fine. That's just all part of, as I said, I've probably said a few times throughout this project, it's just the charm of the project and using different yarns and having that bit of unpredictability. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the midsection. and that was where I had a few more solid colours with the fingering weight yarn. So again, there'll be some different colours here. So I'll do these recycled sari yarns first. A nice little twist. You can encourage them to once you've finished. And this fingering weight wool does not need any encouragement. It's ready to go and twist up beautifully. It's pretty simple to deal with. And then I'll keep moving across. I've got my other fingering weight yarns in this midsection before I come to the next section. And so I'm going to continue this all the way across, and I'm going to continue to break up those novelty yarns as I did for these ones in this section here. It'll all be exactly the same. And then I'm going to wet finish. That will be my next step after this. Also, the other end that I decided not to use and twist the fringe, I'm going to leave that as a hem stitched end, as a finished end, and I'm just going to cut that fringe much shorter at the other end. So before I head to the wet finishing bath, I'll come back and show you what sort of length I'm looking at for that other end, because one thing that people do ask me quite a bit is how short can I cut it as a hem stitch and get away with? And it is a good question, because you shouldn't cut it too short, because that will cause the unraveling. Now this one is just super fluffy, right? So I'm going to just give it a little haircut there, because that's just going to cling so much to the other ones. I can see here that I have left something out of this last bunch, but that's okay. I'll just chuck it in with this bunch. Yeah, so people ask me about hem stitching, how short can I go? And you don't want to go overly short. So I'll show you what that looks like once I've finished here, and then we will be wet finishing. Now, the wet finishing instructions will be included in the pattern, but I'm not actually going to show that part because it's pretty straightforward. You can follow the written instructions in the pattern. So I'll see you in a minute when I've finished twisting these ones up. All right, so this has been wet finished, it has been pressed, and I've cut off all of the tails and straggly bits. A little tip for you, if you have some sort of ripply movement in your fabric, like I still do, but it was much worse than this. It responds better to steam than it does to pressing. So I basically just took my iron over the surface of it and steamed it all over, and that really helped it to sit a lot flatter. So now that we've got this length of fabric, and I've got my pillow insert, which is 14 by 14 inches, thereabouts, I'm going to take my fringed end that is not twisted, okay? So I've got the twisted end up here, and I've got the just regular fringed end down here, and I'm going to fold that up so that this folded part measures about 13.5 inches. So let me check that. And I'm talking about from the edge of the fabric. I'm not talking about any fringe. Okay, so that's 13. So I need it to just go a little bit further. And when you're folding it up, you just want to line up the edges. Okay. So that's more like my 13.5. So now that I've got that, I'm going to use my little handy clips, little quilting clips, and you can use pins, whatever you have, but we're going to secure those two seams together. And I'm going to do mine on my sewing machine, but you don't have to have a sewing machine for this project. You can sew it by hand, absolutely, and there's not a whole lot of sewing to do, so it's very achievable to do it by hand. So if you're going to do it by hand, I would probably use some of the wool that I have used in the warp and the weft, or otherwise a cotton thread is okay. And I would just sew like a back stitch along these edges, probably not a whip stitch. I'd be doing more of a back stitch so that you have seams, because, well, a whip stitch is okay, but it does depend on the whip stitch itself. Like sometimes that could be a little bit gappy, so that when you actually fit your insert in there, you can see parts of the insert from the outside, which isn't really what you want. So a back stitch would be good, because that then prevents that from happening. No gaps, and you have a strong pillow cover that's not going to come apart. So we're very, very close to being finished this project now. Okay, that's all my clips in place. So I'm going to take that to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew along this edge and along the other edge, and I'm just going to do like a regular 1/4 centimetre seam allowance, nothing huge, just my regular, but just to make a small seam along there. And I don't have to worry about doing any serging or anything at the edges, because these are all finished edges. And then you remember that we hem stitched our other raw edges, so we're all good to go. There we go, all sewn up. So now we'll just grab the inside of that and pull it through, so that the seams that we just sewed are on the outside, on the inside. And you want to poke those little holes at the edges. If it's a little bit bulky, you can use something to poke it out with. Usually a finger is okay, but a little instrument will do more. This thing that you've seen me using probably in the sewing video, that's it's called the purple thing. Someone actually gave this to me a couple of years ago, one of my students, and it's been the handiest thing. It means you don't have to get your fingers near the needle when you're sewing, but you need some more precision sewing. It's really good. And you can use it for a bunch of different things too. Okay, so now if you can be bothered, you could take that to the ironing board and iron out those seams. That would reduce the bulk and make them sit a little bit flatter. I'm not going to do that right now because I want to show you the next part of the video. So we take our insert and we're going to pop that right into that pocket that we've just sewn up. So it sits in there nicely. And then we've got our top part still there. So the idea of that is to flip that over the top so that it becomes like that with the pillow. So technically you could call that finished and you could sit it on your couch or whatever you're going to do with it and just leave that top flipped over. But what I'm going to do is just a couple of securing stitches just along here to hold that in place so that it doesn't end up coming undone. And then if you want to wash it at some point, then it's not much to undo those little stitches just to be able to take the cover off and wash it. I've threaded up a needle, double thread, and I've used just like a neutral grey because that's going to blend quite nicely. Alternatively, you could use one of these yarns and you could leave some ties hanging off your knots if you wanted to, you know, do something more in keeping with the style. But I'm going to choose to do mine a bit neutral so that they blend in. So for you, it's upside down at the moment. And I'm just going to make sure that it's sitting just as I want it to. And then I'll just go in behind one of these middle panels here so that the back of the knot is buried. And I'll try not to get stuck on all of these pieces. And it's only going to take a couple of stitches of going up and down to kind of secure that in place. So it's very minimal, but that is now, it's okay, it's there. I just want to pull this bit of fluff out because that's drawing attention to my stitches. So once I have that secured, I'm going to knot that off again with a few knots. And then I'll pull that through. So go back down into the work just on that flap and pull it through, and that buries the knot. Then I can cut that so that it's not showing. And then I'm going to do the same in this spot. So then the flap will be secured there and there, just across the middle. And I think that'll be enough. I wanted to make this project as low sew as possible to make it more accessible to more people, because a lot of people don't have a sewing machine, or they don't have the sewing machine confidence or skills. So it's good to be able to finish a project that anyone can do. If you've got a rigid Heddle loom, you can do this project. You can also upsize or downsize for the size of pillow insert that you have, or for the size loom that you have. So remember, this one was done on the 50 centimeter low yarn flex rigid Heddle loom. But you could change things to go on a different size loom for a different size cover. So just going through that back piece again. You only need just a couple of stitches to secure it, and you cannot see that neutral grey thread at all. So I'm going to knot it now. And then I'll take it through, bury it at the back of that flap, pull so that the knot pops through, and then cut. Now the very last thing to do before I actually use this, and this is optional of course, but when you wet finish, some of those twisted ends get a little bit ratty, depends on the yarn, some of these have. So you can give them a little trim if you want to. My fabric pieces are fine, but my other pieces could use a little trim, and it just gives like a clean edge to your fringe, which makes it look a little more professional. So you can go across and do those if you want to. The wool gets a bit fluffy. It's not really messy or straggly, just fluffy. And then we are about done. So thanks again to Low Yarn for sponsoring this project, and thank you to everyone who is taking part and being inspired by this project. Don't forget to download your free pattern from my website, and the link will be down below for you to do that. And until next time, happy weaving! you.